We thought Melbourne's lockdown was harsh, but nowhere have lockdowns been as brutal as now in Shanghai, China's largest city. China's dictator has insisted zero COVID because he's been boasting that dictatorships are better than democracies in locking down and beating this virus. And up to this point, it's worked. But now, and there's also got another problem, of course, China's own vaccines are weak and vaccination rates not good. Well, as you get in a dictatorship, Shanghai officials have gone really hardcore to please the boss. They've been walling off building complexes. If a building has even one infection, in some cases everyone inside could be shipped off to quarantine camps that have been built in sports grounds, for instance. People who fight back face extraordinary treatment. And now some areas of Shanghai have even been told no deliveries at all, not even of food, for 2 or 3 days. And any delivery men caught not following orders can get beaten. One truck got stopped by a man begging for food and then crying when given bananas and crackers. There are also videos circulating that I can't show you of suicides, people jumping off buildings. And there have been breakouts from lockdown buildings when one factory complex, in fact, had a couple of workers test positive. Hundreds of colleagues fled to avoid getting locked up. In some areas, the frustration has led to angry protests. Joining me from Shanghai is a resident there, Dutch freelance journalist Jaap Grolleman. Jaap, thank you very much for your time. How bad is this lockdown?
Yeah, thank you. It's quite, we all seen the news, and so it's quite bad in a way. Like, we're on day 41. Some people are on day 60, so it's very limited freedom. We had 3 weeks where we couldn't even leave the apartment. And now at least we can walk in our compound, which is like a living district with like 40, 50 buildings. But we cannot enter the city or anything. And that's the case for most people in Shanghai.
We've just had Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, give his May the 9th address at Red Square, right? May the 9th to celebrate the victory over the Nazi state in World War II. And a big deal. And there were worries about what he'd say on this parade, because right now he claims to be fighting new Nazis in Ukraine, right? And he says, people were saying, well, look, he might actually now use this May the 9th to declare war. I mean, all-out war, as if it isn't already, or a national conscription drive in Russia. But he didn't do that. So that's one thing to be grateful for. Instead, he just said, oh, look, I had to take this stupid war. I didn't say stupid, I say stupid. This war, because otherwise we would have been invaded by Ukraine or NATO or some idiot conspiracy campaign like that. And he ended with a great rousing, let's go, to his soldiers.
За Россию! За победу! Ура!
You know what that tells me? That tells me he knows he's losing and he can't afford to escalate. I tell you, the left is becoming quite dangerous. On the weekend, mobs went to the homes of US Supreme Court judges to intimidate the judges about to declare there is actually no constitutional right to an abortion. That abortion laws in the US must be decided instead by politicians in each state. But here is the mob outside the home of Justice Brett Kavanaugh. And here's the protest outside the home of the Chief Justice, John Roberts.
The whole world is watching! The whole world is watching! The whole world is watching!
A far-left group shut down DC. It's linked to Antifa, is also advertising a protest outside the home of another Conservative Justice of the Supreme Court, Samuel Alito, later today. And another far-left group published a map showing the homes of other judges. Antifa has also been publishing This Incitement to Terrorism, a picture of an activist with a Molotov cocktail. slogan, if abortions aren't safe, then you aren't either. And already an anti-abortion organisation's office in Wisconsin has been firebombed and had that same slogan painted on their building with an Antifa logo. Now, the White House had a chance last week to get ahead of this terror. White House spokesman Jennifer Psaki was asked straight out to condemn this intimidation and refused.
He doesn't care if they're protesting outside the Supreme Court or outside someone's private residence.
I don't have an official U.S. government position on where people protest.
What a disgusting response. Joining me is Brendan O'Neill, political editor of the online magazine Spiked. Brendan, what do you make of all this?
I think it's really shocking. I think it's crossing a line. I'm fully in favour of the right to protest. I'm fully in favour of people gathering in public spaces and making noise and making demands and putting pressure on politicians. Of course, that is part of political life. But you don't protest outside someone's private residence. You don't protest outside someone's home. Firstly, because their families are in there and their families have nothing to do with these political issues. And also because it's intimidating. It is meant to be threatening. It's a way of saying, we know where you live and we're going to make your life miserable right in the heart of your private life until you do what we want you to do.
The transgender issue that Scott Morrison didn't say a word for 3 years on this topic, right? Not a topic. Then he handpicks Catherine Deves right in the middle of an election to then, be a candidate in Warringah and then start raising the issue. And then the Liberals think, do we back or do we not? And ground's not prepared. Looks like a bomb, doesn't look like a crusade to actually change minds. I thought that is not an election winning issue because at this stage, relatively few voters directly affected. You object.
Yeah, I do, Andrew, because I think although literally or directly it may only affect a small number of people, but even that I would disagree with because increasingly parents are seeing their kids come home from school confused about gender, confused about sexuality. But also this is an issue in which the left is trying to make you believe A is B, black is white, boys are girls, and this is why it's such a crucial issue, because it is the left telling us what is not true. That's why it has to be fought and should be fought front and central by the Liberal Party.
Actor James Cromwell is one of the stars of Babe and Succession. He's demonstrated one of the defining characteristics of left-wing activists, demanding other people pay for his choices, like the left demand that we pay for their ABC, the Writers' Festivals, the global warming religions. Now superglued himself to a counter of a Starbucks in New York protesting against the change surcharge on vegan milks to cover the extra cost. It's about 70 cents for a dairy alternative. But now other customers have got to pay for Cromwell's vegan milk. I mean, it's absurd. Yesterday at Sydney's Eastwood Market, a very Chinese part of Sydney, around 5 o'clock, a man dressed up as a soldier of Communist China's People's Liberation Army, standing there carrying a sign. Chinese people support Xi Jinping, the Chinese dictator. Bit of argy-bargy with some passers-by, a little discussion, but no trouble, no arrest. An hour later, student Drew Pavlou, who's running for the Senate in Queensland, went to this same market with his sign. Very different message. Free Tibet, free Uyghurs, free Hong Kong, and down with the Chinese Communist Party. Another sign said, down with Xi Jinping. But this time, New South Wales police arrested him after some Chinese men got a bit angry and all that, and police later said Pavlou's gathering was obstructing pedestrian traffic. Police were concerned the unauthorised assembly was causing fear and alarm among the community. Fear and alarm due to the escalating antisocial behaviour of those present. Well, this whole thing's very curious. Joining me is Drew Pavlou, now standing for the Senate in Queensland. Drew, thanks for your time. What exactly happened yesterday?
Thanks for having me on, Andrew. Basically, it's as simple as this. I'm an Australian citizen running for election. I held up a sign criticising Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party in the middle of Sydney, one of Australia's greatest cities, and I was last week I was assaulted and bashed. This week we were arrested. Yesterday I was standing there peacefully. I didn't lay a finger on anyone. I simply held up the sign and I chanted "Free Hong Kong," and I wasn't even the most vocal person there yesterday. I mean, believe it or not, there were pro-democracy Chinese supporters. There were Hong Kongers, Taiwanese, Tibetans. They had their flags. They were chanting in Mandarin. They were chanting in Cantonese. I wasn't even the most vocal, but for some reason, police targeted me. They pulled me aside. They gave me the charge sheet for the offensive language on the sign last week, even though my lawyer Tony Morris had actually messaged them multiple times asking to clarify if I was being charged. They waited to serve me right there at the protest, and then 3-4 minutes later, they arrested me on the spot. Even though I hadn't done anything, I wasn't even at the forefront of the protest. I wasn't even being that vocal. If you watch the live stream footage, I was standing to the side and police called me off and they said, if you don't leave now, we're going to arrest you. And I said, with respect, officer, I believe in free speech. This is a democracy. I'm campaigning for election. I'm not going to be going home. You'll have to arrest me with respect.
China's dictatorship has just crossed a red line. It has now arrested a cardinal of the Catholic Church, claiming he's broken China's national security laws. Police in Hong Kong arrested 90-year-old Cardinal Joseph Zen for raising money for legal fees for pro-democracy protesters. Now, for the Catholic Church, this is a moment of truth because Pope Francis has been shockingly weak in standing up to China. The excuse is that, well, if he takes a tough line, it's just going to make things worse for China's estimated 12 million Catholics. But to me, the Pope has sold out freedom and sold out brave Christians like Cardinal Zen, who have dared to stand up against a totalitarian regime that's been trying to crush a free church. The final school curriculum has now been released, and yes, it is an improvement. A lot of peripheral stuff removed to make way for more basics, key maths concepts are now taught earlier. And there's finally a partial return to phonics in teaching English. A as in cat, at as in cat, and E as in bee, that kind of stuff. Yet, the woke stuff is still being smuggled in. Global warming is terrible. British settlement was a devastating invasion. Aboriginal history is deep time, and vegetarianism is good. And there are even lessons on exploring the students' eco-identity. Joining me is Bella de Brera, Director of the Foundations of Western Civilization Program at the Institute of Public Affairs. Bella, always great to see you. First, explain this eco-identity to us.
Andrew, it's actually a very difficult concept to explain because it's new to the national curriculum. And there's no actual explanation in the curriculum. They just require year 9 and 10 students to develop what they call an eco-identity. From what I can gather, it's based on a sort of green ideology, a sort of pagan green ideology that elevates nature above human beings. It's this idea that nature is good and human beings are evil. So I can tell you that, and I can also tell you what it's not. It's not encouraging school children to develop an identity based on family or being an individual or based on their community or based on their nation. So the worrying thing here is that we now have a new national curriculum which has green sort of ideology, pagan ideology, incorporated into the national curriculum, and it's been endorsed by Labour and Liberal state governments, as well as the coalition, as well as our federal government.
We already knew that Albanese kept thinking this economy was worse than it actually was. For instance, he started this election campaign, day one, saying unemployment was much higher. And then saying that more people now relied on casual work when there are actually fewer. And then that there were more than twice as many people juggling 3 jobs than there really are. And you've got to ask, if you don't understand the economy, how can you fix it? How can you manage it? But it was not until this week that Albanese also got hopelessly exposed, making crazy promises he can't keep. And what was so funny today was that he and his party were trying desperately to pretend it wasn't a mistake, but a stroke of genius. I've got to show you this. Now, you know that Albanese's big pitch, if you watch TV ads, is that everything is going up under the Liberals except your wages, implying that under an Albanese Labor government, your wages are finally going to rise as fast as prices.
Labor has a plan to lift wages, and that is what we will do.
This was always hokum. I mean, no Prime Minister can simply order wages to rise. And in Sunday's debate, Albanese's fraud was laid bare with this question.
Just to summarise, you can't guarantee that real wages will rise.
We will. We will try to do what we can.
But Albanese couldn't actually make that promise because he's actually selling moon dust. And other journalists were now waking up to his con. And on Tuesday, Albanese was asked another direct question and he panicked.
Mr. Albanese, just back to wages. You said you don't want people to go backwards. Does that mean you would support a wage hike of at least 5.1% just to keep up with inflation?
Absolutely.
To our election, Greg, you don't seem impressed at all by this Seinfeld election about nothing, or as Shakespeare probably put it for us very well, all sound and fury signifying nothing.
No, I think this has been a pathetic election, Andrew, and the major parties only have themselves to blame if the minor parties increase their votes. I mean, some of our friends think I've been a bit tough on the government. I'm no great fan of the Labor Party, believe me, but it's the government which has been in office for nearly a decade, and I couldn't agree more with your earlier editorial. What has the Morrison government fought for in its life? On these culture wars issues, Morrison never goes near them for 3 years, and then 1 minute before the election he unveils a religious freedom bill in a way that obviously it cannot possibly pass before the election, and then he does a little song and dance of it around the election as though we are meant to pin a medal on his chest for his bravery. The Morrison government has run away from every fight.
The only effective Liberal ad this campaign really... Oh, sorry. No, let's talk first about the Labor campaign. I want to compare the two ads, the ad campaign, social media as well. I think Labor has actually had the most effective ads. They've been devastating, even when they're dishonest.
That's not my job. That's not my job. It's not my job to do that.
Authorised by P. Erickson, Australian Labor Party camp.
Now, the only Liberal ad that I think is, punched home has actually been a defensive one, not an attack ad, one exposing Labor's lies in that ad you just saw.
Why haven't you personally lost patience with Dan Andrews?
Because that's not my job. My job is to keep focused on the challenge that I have to protect Australians every single day. That's not my job, or whatever it happens to be. It's their money. It's their choice. I'm not going to go around telling Australians how to spend their own money. That's not my job. They're quite able to know what they should be doing with their own money.
Talk about Labor taking people deceitfully out of context. Well, apart from that, though, that Liberal counter ad, most of the Liberal ads have been more annoying and also making people think, well, wait a minute, life under the Liberals now isn't easy either.
Mr Albanese wanted big taxes on retirees and housing, now pretends he doesn't. He tells Melbourne he opposes coal, but tells Queensland he supports it. When Australia needs certainty, it won't be easy under Albanese. Authorised by Ahurst Liberal, Canberra.
There's a hole in your budget, dear Labor, dear Labor.
Daisy, what do you make of the two ad campaigns you've been seeing on TV and on social media?
Well, look, on the Labor campaign, Andrew, I reckon Labor must have been taking lessons from CNN in how to take a Conservative politician out of context. That is just extraordinary, what they did with that ad. I mean, it's like what CNN used to do with Donald Trump, would just take one thing he said, put it in a totally different context and make him look like a white supremacist or a Nazi or whatever they talked about. It's completely unbelievable. And look, while I'm never really surprised when politicians are dishonest. I mean, Andrew, they do have a bit of a reputation. I really do expect better of Labor than this, and I wouldn't normally say that about any kind of political party. And it also shows, Andrew, just how little Labor evidently has to offer Australians and just how completely uninspiring they are and how desperate they are to win. If these are the kind of tactics they have to resort to in order to woo Australians into voting for them. And the problem is, Andrew, as you said, the ads are quite devastating because, dishonest or not, they are effective. There will be people who who watch that ad from Labor have no idea that the quotes have been taken out of context because they won't have seen the Liberals ad because it came really too late. It was a defensive ad. And they will be swung to vote for Labor because of that dishonest ad campaign. And look, as for the Liberals, I'm glad they got at least one blow in there with their defensive one showing how it was taken out of context. But for goodness sake, the rest of the campaign, Andrew, I mean, what are they doing going around singing, "There's a hole in your budget, dear Labor, dear Labor"? What is that? Doesn't that just make you want to scream? It's like they're trying to paint themselves as naff and uninspiring. I mean, really, I don't think the voters want that either.